Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Carrie Murray, and I serve as president of Shelterbox USA. It is an absolute privilege to have all of you joining us today. We have a very special discussion today. We're going to be talking about global displacement and really the role of shelter in mitigating the spread of COVID-19. Now, I hope all of you are staying well. I hope all of you are staying healthy. And we so appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We have people from all over the country and actually all over the world, so that's very exciting. A little bit about me. I joined Shelterbox USA 5 years ago, but it was really 5 years before that. It was in 2010 when I was on the ground working in Haiti, when I came upon the first humanitarian organization I saw working in Port-au-Prince, and that was Shelterbox. And really, in the midst of a crisis, you really see that the most vulnerable people on the planet really just need the most basic things: food, water, shelter. And in that situation in Haiti, it was 1.5 million people displaced in an instant. Little did I know 5 years later I'd be joining the organization, and it has been the biggest privilege of my professional life. Now, I want to share a little bit about the organization very quickly: who we are, what we do, why we do it, and then I'm going to introduce a very special guest, the CEO, the Chief Executive of Shelterbox. And we're going to have a brief discussion, and it's going to be followed by a Q&A, and we're going to really get into the heart and soul of kind of the humanitarian situation in our world right now, and really talk about how humanitarian organizations are meeting this moment that we're in, albeit a ton of challenges that we're facing. So a little bit about Shelterbox. Really, we have been at this for 2 decades, the past 20 years, and we exist because we are trying to confront one of the biggest issues that's plaguing our planet. And it's this massive displacement of people. And believe it or not, there are more people displaced in our world than any time in recorded history. And we're going to talk about that today. It's people who've been displaced by natural disaster situations, so earthquakes, tsunamis, fires, floods, and also through conflict situation. People who are forced to flee in an instant, but due to violence, to civil war. And it is a massive issue that's plaguing our world today. So we're going to talk a bit more about that. Now, Shelterbox was started 20 years ago on the very basic premise of what are the things that you need to sustain your life if you lose everything in an instant. And this is happening all across our world. And really, our founders, they were Rotarians. They had one mission, and it was to serve a massive unmet need in our world. And it was around the provision of emergency shelter and basic household supplies to enable a family to recover after a disaster. So to this day, we actually still deploy a standard shelter box. If you know us, you probably know that iconic green box. And inside, and the contents of which really enable a family to get going again. The center of gravity, and it stays true today, is the provision of the shelter. Shelter is critical. It is the first step to recovery. So the emergency shelter, and this is a very similar tent that we deploy today. It's called the Standard Relief Tent. It looks like a recreation tent. It is made for humanitarian purposes. It will be the place a family calls home after a disaster. In addition to the tent, there are a whole range of different household items that are really critical to the health and safety of a family. One, in disasters, you often have contamination of the water source. So there's a water purification unit. There's containers to store purified water. You've lost power. So common in disasters. So solar lanterns that provide light to do basic tasks, get back to work, provide safety. Aid organizations are often bringing in food and water. What are you going to cook and prepare a hot meal in? And we're going to talk today about some of those items, which includes cooking equipment. So cooking equipment, so key to helping restore a sense of routine, normalcy, boil water, serve a hot meal to a family. Also tools. So in disasters, you see people digging out with their bare hands, a basic tool set to help with the repair process, blankets, ground mats, mosquito net to protect against vector-borne disease, and even a school kit inside. For a very long time, we deployed primarily shelter boxes. This is what they looked like. One shelter box would serve one family. And really, over the years, Shelterbox has grown very far beyond just the box. And it includes other items that help repair a home that's been damaged or actually create a single room structure like you see here. This is called the shelter kit. It is a toolkit with tarpaulins and tools and fixins that can help become a home for a family very rapidly. It also very much enables us to scale and serve a response, particularly when resources are slim. So this is a very classic way, but there's an infinite number of ways that we actually deploy this very versatile shelter kit item. But whether it's a tent, and there's a whole wide variety of different tents that we deploy, whether it's tarpaulins or other aid items, the purpose of what we do has stayed true for 2 decades. And it's really to enable a family to self-recover, like you see here, enable a family to get going again. And we know whether it's a conflict situation, whether it's a disaster situation, or whether it's now a pandemic, shelter is one of the most tangible and important items that you can give to a family. It's one of the most important things that can impact their life. It is the first step in recovery. So we've been at it for 20 years. We have not been at it alone. It takes a massive, massive global village, humanitarian village, to make this happen. We have many partners on the ground that we work with that help us deploy this aid around the world. You're going to learn about that. And we have one very long-standing partner in Rotary International. It is the oldest service organization in the world, and they are a massive tie that binds our ability to do this work from day one. And I am very, very privileged to say that Shelterbox remains the official project partner of Rotary International in disasters. And it's a huge, huge boost to this work. We also have far more volunteers than staff around the world. It takes a global village of volunteers and people who really want to serve in so many different ways. And that includes people who serve on the front lines of crisis. We established a response team program, the SRT, the Shelterbox Response Team, when we got going 20 years ago. And it was all about tapping into civilians and harnessing the collective power of volunteers from around the world who do everything from boots on the ground, conduct assessments, coordinate with the UN, help work through the logistical challenges of getting our aid into the country and into the hands of the beneficiaries, working locally with the people that we serve and doing the monitoring and evaluation. And they are a huge, huge, huge reason and catalyst behind the organization's ability to do this work. So some of you are on the call today, so thank you for participating. Thank you for your service to this organization. In 20 years, Shelterbox has served in over 300 deployments, over 100 countries, and very, very much honored that this organization, while a lot of its work is very quiet, it's on the worst day ever that the work of Shelterbox makes the headlines. Our work in conflict and crisis situations was really the catalyst in 2018 and in 2019 that Shelterbox received 2 separate nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize. So really a testament to the volunteers, to the people who get behind and support this global work. But COVID-19 has added a whole new disaster on top of a disaster. It has been a massive challenge for every person on the planet, as you know, and humanitarian organizations cannot take a day off, and we can't hit pause. And the disasters, the conflicts, the needs of our organization have only increased for our work. And we have been very much growing and adapting to try to meet that need, but it is not without massive logistical challenges, I will tell you that. So I want to talk about some of those challenges. I want to talk about global displacement. I want to talk about the role of Shelterbox and the role of shelter in this moment that we're in right now. And I couldn't be more privileged than to introduce our chief executive. We could have searched the whole world over and we could not have found a finer humanitarian and a finer gentleman than the man I'm going to introduce. And his name is Sanj Shrikanthan. And Sanj has a long history in humanitarian work. And that is coming out of being a captain in the British Army for 6 years. He went on to work for 2 decades, and he has worked in the UK and in Europe, leading a huge organization called the International Rescue Committee. He was there for 10 years. And in addition to working and running operations, he also worked in the field for quite some time. He was leading teams on the Iran and Iraq border. If you remember the Ebola crisis, which plagued West Africa, he was working on the front lines of that crisis and that outbreak. He is an incredible humanitarian. He cares a lot about the work of this organization. Prior to the IRC, he actually worked for the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, UN-OCHA, and it's a privilege to introduce our chief executive, Sanj, to all of you today. For many of you, it's the first time meeting him. Sanj, welcome. We are thrilled to have you here.
Thank you, Kerry, for that very generous welcome, and it's great to join all of you, and thanks for taking the time to listen in today.
Awesome. So Sanj, you've obviously been a captain in the Army, you've worked for UN-OCHA, you've worked for the IRC, you've been on the front lines of some of the biggest crisis situations in our world. I want to know, what was it about Shelterbox and shelter that really compelled and attracted you to this organization?
Well, yeah, as you've described, Kerry, it's been an unusual path over the last 20 years from the British Army to Shelterbox, but one that I'm really proud and really honored to be able to be part of, because humanitarianism is something I wanted to dedicate my life to, and I've had that opportunity both at the IRC and now at Shelterbox. But like you, the first time I came across Shelterbox's work was in Haiti in 2010, when I was driving to a coordination meeting, and there were a lot of those. There were these tents going up on the sides of the road when so many people were displaced, and they had this logo that I hadn't seen before. And I used to go to these coordination meetings day after day, and every day I'd see more of these tents appearing up. And on some of the high points in Port-au-Prince, if any of you have been there, you could see these tents filling up every available space in an urban setting, providing meaningful shelters that were still there 6 months later for people who had lost literally everything in that terrible earthquake. And the number one concern at the time was not only the earthquake and another one happening, but also cyclones. And these tents were designed, I thought, brilliantly to withstand those extreme weathers. And that's how I came to know about Shelterbox. And although I didn't meet the team at the time, I was intrigued about an organization that had found exactly what was needed in the midst of this crisis, and they weren't talking about doing something, they were actually doing something. So it's been really fortunate for me that I've been able to become chief exec now 10 years on from that, in a sector where 8% of global shelter needs are met, that we have an organization like Shelterbox that's not just delivering shelter, but high quality shelter, going the last mile, often in very extreme circumstances, to make sure we're getting to the most vulnerable. And you can see in the image there just the cost of a lack of shelter and what it means in terms of other impact, in terms of healthcare, education, safety, particularly for women and girls.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. You said 8% of the world's shelter needs are met, which means 92% aren't. So let's talk about global displacement. We know that those numbers are increasing every year. The most recent report indicated 104 million people are displaced in our world today. Can you talk about global displacement and displacement drivers? What's driving that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a staggering figure, and there are even more staggering figures if you unpick it. 1 billion of us are living in a country with a humanitarian crisis. And almost 1 in 5 of us on this planet are in a country with a protracted crisis defined as more than 5 years long. And it's curious because extreme poverty has reduced year on year since the end of World War II. So why is the number so high? Well, it's a number of things. Firstly, let's look at the past. Conflicts that run on, often within a state, for longer than ever. And the most notorious and the one we know best is Syria, that's going to be approaching its 10-year anniversary next March. But it's also natural disasters that are becoming less predictable in terms of frequency and location in certain regions of the world. Often these are the regions where the most extreme poor are located. And they're not just the rapid onset events that you hear about in the news, earthquakes, cyclones, floods. They're also the more chronic changes. For example, I'm sure many of you have heard in Bangladesh of Cyclone Amphan that came through this summer. Actually, the rainfall that happened week on week after the cyclone had passed had caused more damage and displacement and human suffering than the actual cyclone. But that doesn't get the attention. And so we need to think about the bigger context of what natural disasters are going to do. Or, for example, drought, which by 2050 could see 1.2 billion in sub-Saharan Africa at risk of displacement simply because of lack of water. And so when we think about that, we also need to think about the present, which is coronavirus and this pandemic. This is not the planet's first, but of course, we've seen the terrifying speed at which it can spread. And the pandemic itself, what we're seeing is not the cause of displacement in most of the places we work. Instead, it's making it more dangerous to be displaced, because if you're homeless and displaced, it's that much harder to keep your family safe. And so that's why we've responded with a global coronavirus response plan, which we can talk about. And then if we look at sort of the future, it's the fact that we expect to see extreme poverty concentrated, certainly by 2050, in the most fragile and conflict affected states, from around 45% of the world's poor in fragile and conflict affected states to 64% by 2050. And these are the places where you're going to be more vulnerable to other shocks, such as pandemics, other ones after coronavirus, and to the changing climate. And lastly, I think we need to account for the fact that with the changing climate comes lessening of critical resources. The world has 60% less fresh water than it did 50 years ago, which means, as many might predict, conflicts of the future, which drive the kind of displacement Shelterbox responds to, could be driven by a lack of water or other essential aids of life. And that's why our kits, our shelter kits, are adapting, and why water and the ability to purify untreated water at family level is one of the many measures in our response to the changing planet.
Wow, thank you for that. I think without a doubt, I mean, a massive challenge we were up against before, right? Just in the current displacement in our world with conflicts, disaster situations. But COVID has added this massive complexity to it, and particularly in places that are overcrowded, where there's social distancing isn't an option, it's very much a threat and very much a challenge. So we hear a lot about vaccines, we hear a lot about medical interventions and health and hygiene, but can you speak to shelter and the role in shelter in really helping at this point to slow the spread of this virus right now, and why it's critical?
Yeah, I mean, the vaccine is absolutely critical, and there's a global effort to find a vaccine solution, but the vaccine is only the beginning of the answer. In order to get the kind of herd immunity we're talking about, you'd have to have 70% of humanity vaccinated, and that's a multi-year venture. If you think about the success we finally achieved in eliminating polio in Africa this year, to do this all over again with coronavirus is going to be a long road. And so we need to think about how we prevent people getting coronavirus in the first place, just as we're doing in our own societies. When I was responding to Ebola in Monrovia, we used similar measures around test, trace, isolate, and treat to stem the spread of that disease. And while that was a viral hemorrhagic fever, something different that manifested itself differently, the principles are actually the same. Many Liberians at the time simply did not have the means or space to isolate effectively from those who might have it. And I wish, when setting up treatment units in Monrovia at the time, I had a shelter partner to provide more means to help those with symptoms isolate and not create more demand for beds, which were in short supply. And if we look at coronavirus today in the places we work, there's a chronic lack of equipment, from northwest Syria with around 11 working ventilators to Somalia with 10 intensive care beds for the entire country. So in these places, getting coronavirus where you do need extensive medical intervention is likely to be, sadly, a death sentence. So unlike with Ebola, which affected relatively few countries, the world's resources can't keep up to treat everyone as we would like our own families treated. So we have to prevent people getting coronavirus, and that's where shelter is so important. If you can isolate your family, keep hands clean, get PPE, and have your own purified water supply, which you're not sharing with others, your chances of surviving this terrible virus are exponentially higher. And their survival, let's remember, is our survival, because we need to eliminate this virus globally.
So let's dig into that a little more. And I hope every single person on this webinar can maybe even relate to the work of Shelterbox and the role of shelter even differently today, and the role that our home plays in our health and safety day in and day out. But specific to the work of Shelterbox, and I know day one of this, you had activated all of us and said there's a massive role that we can play. It's not going to come without its challenges, and we are going to have to adapt to meet this moment. So can you share the ways that we've adapted, the ways that we've had to work differently, the challenges we faced to continue this work in this crisis?
Well, first of all, adaptation is not something new for Shelterbox. It's something we've constantly sought to do over the last 20 years. And for example, the items that you showed on your slide at the start of this talk, it varies and has varied depending on which emergency and which context, and also what we know the likely needs are. But more importantly, it's adaptation through feedback loops that have been core to our work for so long. We're committed to ensuring that 40% of the targeted beneficiaries of our aid are feeding back whilst distributions are ongoing, so that we are able to pivot and change our response more sharply than rather than after the distribution is finished. So adaptation has been part of how we respond to emergencies, and this year, as part of our global COVID response plan, we've adapted again to what is needed to help people isolate effectively, but also to prevent them getting coronavirus. So you've seen items such as hygiene materials, soap, water, PPE going into those kits, as well as the additional items that you need to sustain yourself as an independent household for longer. It also means distributing differently, meaning longer distributions, because we want fewer people coming on a particular day to get shelter kits. And there are some amazing images of how we're doing this in places like Syria under some very difficult contexts where there's an ongoing conflict. It means partnering with others, such as Doctors Without Borders in Syria, to know who in a distribution has coronavirus, to keep them and us safe. So the way we also monitor is different. So monitoring and evaluation can't always take place in person, but using tools like Kobo for tablet research and feedback, but also phone interviews, we're still getting the information we need to adapt and make our model relevant to coronavirus. I think the key is we cannot ever stop delivering the aid. We just need to make it more effective and acute to the circumstances. And coronavirus is exactly the kind of crisis that we are ready for.
So you talked about some of the adaptations, and I think they're very powerful, they're very important, they're critical. So hand washing basins, social distancing, the use of PPE, so sanitizers, gloves, masks, a health advisor at these distributions. But I know there are other ways too that we've been supporting some impacted health systems, and particularly around helping them really with the triage facilities. And so can you talk a little bit about having to lean into other areas beyond just shelter, where we're helping to fill some gaps right now?
Yeah, it's a really important area where we are broadening our mandate responsibly. We are still shelter experts, but what we find is the use of shelter to combat coronavirus is key. And the image you see at the moment is the distribution of shelter kits adapted to be testing centers outside of main hospital facilities in the Philippines, to ensure that people who are suspected of having coronavirus are not spreading the virus in the main hospital, but are getting treated in a remote location just outside the hospital using our tents, and therefore can be diagnosed and appropriately quarantined. And that's saving lives in a vulnerable location like a hospital with people who have other conditions who can't afford to get coronavirus. These tents are helping to save lives. So we're constantly adapting the principles of shelter in the context of coronavirus, as so many others are, and it's great to see when it works. The next big project that the team are going to be looking at is rural vaccinations. If we get a vaccine, the penetration of the vaccine needs to extend beyond just the urban setting, and their tents can often double and have doubled for us in the past as vaccine centers in rural location, mobile treatment units effectively providing vaccines. And how can we be part of what is going to be a truly global venture to roll out the vaccine to the most vulnerable?
Mm-hmm. So, Sand, one of the things that you said early on, and I've seen this quote many places, you said coronavirus isn't over until it's over everywhere. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is still true. Unlike natural disasters, unlike most conflicts, coronavirus has not been geographically limited, as we've seen. It spread from a place called Wuhan in China, which most of us may not have heard of before 2020, to become a global pandemic. And it isn't over yet. And as I said, we're still waiting for a vaccine. But if it can spread from Wuhan, which is a location with 6,000 people per square kilometer, it can spread from a Rohingya refugee camp in Bangladesh, which has a density of 40,000 people per square kilometer. So over 5 times as many people per square kilometer. And the issue is that the gap in resources is vast between the United States or the UK or China and the least developed countries, the conflict affected countries, those that are dealing with extreme poverty, natural disaster, and sometimes civil conflict all at the same time. And the issue is that at the moment, many countries are focusing on problems closer to home. And we've got to think as humanitarians about a global solution. And so when you look at the countries we're currently working in, from the Pacific Islands to Syria, Somalia, Burkina Faso, we're really trying to get to places where not only are there the more traditional conflicts and natural disasters that we've always responded to, there's also overcrowding and a lack of inadequate numbers of shelter items and shelter kits that are providing effectively breeding grounds for the transmission of coronavirus. And every time we are able to provide a family with the means to isolate, as we've talked about, we're reducing the likelihood of transmission and contributing to a global effort to stop and flatten that R rate, the reproductive rate of the virus, below 1 in some of the most forgotten corners of the world.
Mm-hmm. So I definitely want to talk about some recent responses, and I don't want anyone on the webinar to think it's been easy, because it's been hard. It's been more expensive. It's definitely slowed many of us down. And for good reason. I think our #1 goal is doing no harm in these communities, especially during the pandemic right now. But in April of this year, there was a massive cyclone. I don't know that many people heard about it, but it was a Category 5 cyclone, and it devastated the northern provinces of the island nation of Vanuatu. And some of these islands were 95% destroyed. I know we spoke immediately after the organization was activating, but we knew that our traditional model of sending response members in was going to be tough, because the country was not letting any foreign nationals in. They didn't have COVID. They didn't want COVID. So, but we felt this responsibility to do something, knowing that in many of these places, maybe no other shelter actor was going to go. So can you talk about how we were able to adapt and work very differently in this disaster, albeit with many challenges? But I'd love if you could share a bit more about this response.
Yeah, Vanuatu was really difficult for the people of Vanuatu more than anyone else, because they faced a huge crisis at a time when the world's attention was elsewhere. But moreover, they very understandably said, look, we don't have any cases of coronavirus. We're on an island in the middle of the Pacific. We want to keep it that way because we can't afford to respond to the kind of coronavirus outbreak that the West has seen. And we wanted to respect that because above all else, humanitarians live by the principle do no harm. And so we needed to firstly respond where others were not responding and not forget Vanuatu just because it's on the other side of the world. But secondly, also do it in a way that didn't cause further harm. And so we partnered with an organization called CARE, which some of you may have heard of on the ground, who were already in country, so they didn't need to fly anyone in, to deliver our shelter kits according to the standards and specifications we would expect. And through that, we were able to reach 2,000 families with kits. And I can tell you, it was literally almost planes, trains, and boats and ships, because it had to be flown to Australia and then shipped to Vanuatu, and then from the main island in these small boats that you see in the images, taken to the outlying islands, because we don't just distribute to the first people, we distribute to the most in need based on needs assessment, and those were in some of the most remote locations in those islands. And I can tell you that the first reaction of people was just complete shock that anyone knew about their problems, and secondly, who were the people behind the aid and how did they get here, because they honestly felt that the world had forgotten them at that point. And you can imagine in that small place in such a big world that's something that they feel often, but it was great for at least this response to be there for them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Very powerful photos that are coming out of that deployment. Now, at the same time, Shelterbox is finding ways to reach families affected by natural disasters. I know we feel a particular responsibility to reach families who are displaced by conflict. And particularly in an area that's near and dear to my heart are people who are disproportionately affected, and those tend to be women and children. So we talk a lot about the numbers in the millions and 104 million people displaced in our world, and we know that 75% of them are women and children. But what I would like to share with everyone now is not in the thousands of families that we're sheltering. I want to break it down to one family that we've been able to support during the COVID crisis. And this woman and her family, her name is Fan, they are indicative of the families that we work to find in the world and who desperately need our help. Fan is 30 years old. She's beautiful. She lives currently in a place called Cameroon. And Cameroon is famous because for the past 10 years, it is home to one of the largest refugee camps in the Central African sub-region. And there are many, many people displaced from the Lake Chad Basin that seek refuge in this country. And in particular, they're at a camp called the Minuau camp. The Minuau camp was set up several years ago. It was originally designed to hold 20,000 people. It is now home to over 70,000 refugees, and many of them are women and children, and their families, including Fan's. So Fan arrived, and she arrived this year at the Minuau camp. She will likely live for a generation at this camp. But I want to tell you, when she arrived from Nigeria. And like so many Nigerians, she fled because of Boko Haram violence. She fled with her 8 children, the youngest of which is 9 months old. And her husband, who is still in Nigeria, was wounded in the Boko Haram attack. He lost his leg, and he pled with her to leave with their children to seek refuge in Cameroon. She traveled for days, sleeping outside wherever she could, and she finally was taken by security forces when she reached the Cameroon border to the Minuau camp. Now, if you are a refugee and you are getting processed into a camp, including Minuau, you are held in what's called a transit center. It's a collective center where you're getting processed through. Fan and her family, in the beginning of the COVID crisis, stayed in this collective center for 3 months. And she says to our teams that the conditions were very harsh. They slept on the floor, but they were in very crowded situations. And this is so common, overcrowded. There's no ability to social distance. There's no ability to self-isolate. And She showed up to the transit center with nothing more than the clothes on her back. That's all she had. She had no food, she had no money. And her quote to us was, "It was my first time experiencing such suffering with my children. You know, this is an indescribable feeling. You can't understand or imagine unless it happens to you." So she spent 3 months in the collective center. Now, the important role that Shelterbox plays at the Vanuatu camp is that there is one humanitarian provider, and that's Shelterbox, that is the only provider of tents to new arrivals at the camp. So as you're processed through, you receive a Shelterbox tent and basic household items. And after 3 months, in June of this year, Fan and her family received their Shelterbox tent, which you can see behind them. And that has been a huge catalyst into their road to recovery. And I want to share with you some of the quotes that she provided the team in what we do, which is called monitoring, evaluating, and learning, when we seek to really understand the impacts that these aid items are having on the lives of these families, where we can do better, where we can shift and adapt where needed. And she had said that as a single mother, her most important thing that she can do right now is take care of her children. And so Fan not only received the tent, she also received some other aid items, some blankets, ground mats, cooking equipment, which we'll get to in a minute, solar lanterns, water purification. And she said that this home has been able to give them a bit of rest and to be able to connect as a family again. Now, she is really trying to find a job. She's starting to earn money. She goes out into the brush every day and she collects firewood, which she sells, and she uses to buy food for her family. And in addition to that, she wanted to share that, like everyone else in the world, I'm involved in the fight against coronavirus. And I'm trying to keep safe by avoiding crowded places, but I have my new shelter, I have my new home to keep my family safe. Everyone talks about coronavirus, but I want to thank the supporter who gave us this tent, and it enabled us to get out of the crowded place where we were staying and to be able to wash our hands several times a day. I do my best to follow the measures prescribed, like the distancing, and I try. She's starting a new life, and she said her home has been so important because it's able to provide a refuge to her family. But she said to the team that the most important item that she received from Shelterbox and from Idea Relief is the cooking set that gets provided. And many people think of it as the shelter, but there are many other items that make up the kits and the aid that we provide. One of those items is a cook set. And you can see it behind her, and you can actually see it in the next photo. And what she shared with our team is the most important item is the cooking, because all I can do for my children is cook a hot meal and care for them. Thank you so much. It has really changed our lives. And it's these very, very simple things that we provide. It's the shelter, it's cooking equipment, it's lights, it's water purification. But these are really the basic building blocks for all of us, that they're essential to life. And on the road to recovery for a refugee, these are absolutely critical. Now, I know we have some supporters on the webinar who specifically have provided some of this aid items. LDSC, thank you so much for all that you've done to help support this project. It wouldn't have happened without you. And as you can see, while our work is important every day, COVID-19 has only created a new challenge, but a critical challenge for these families. And we are committed to meeting the challenges that these families face. So thank you for that support. So Sandra, I want to talk about, as we move into the latter part of the year, and I know we don't have a crystal ball, we don't know about vaccine, we're all patiently waiting. All we know is that our work continues. We can't hit pause, we have to keep going. So can you talk about some of the biggest areas of focus for our organization as we round out the year?
Yeah, there's a lot of competition for resources, but also for the kind of mission that Shelterbox is providing. But let me talk to you about some of the top things that we're watching. Firstly, Burkina Faso, which is fascinating because it isn't just in the midst of conflict. It also has a rising coronavirus caseload, as well as changing weather patterns affected by the events in the Sahel. And all of these are playing upon each other. So sure, the climate and the drought is impacting displacement, but also driving conflict. The youth bulge and the lack of unemployment is also driving that conflict. And what we're seeing is that this has been a sleeping crisis that is coming to people's attention now, but by no means is it far enough. And our aid is growing exponentially to families who are displaced. And the advantage with our kits is that many families who have been displaced more than once are able to move with some of the key items that they are getting from us. So it is making a tangible difference. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, Syria is approaching the 10-year anniversary. So this will be the 9th winter. And I was there for the first winter in Turkey, getting cross-border aid into the north of Syria. And it was really tragic to see not the images you're looking at there with little babies in onesies, but actually choices being made by families about whether there would be enough food or enough warmth and clothing for the children, and making some fundamental choices which no father or mother should ever have to make. I don't want to see a replay of that this winter, but we're seeing over 250,000 of the most vulnerable who lack adequate shelter. And that's without renewed fighting, which may well start again this autumn. And so we need to make sure that there is sufficient aid. We're going to reach at least half of those with a huge project over the Christmas, but we'd like to reach as many more households as possible. And what's important to remember there is that families in the desert aren't experiencing what you might think if you haven't been to the Middle East, warmth, because it is highly inhospitable. And I've been a soldier living in a hole in the ground in the Middle East, and it goes from very hot during the day to incredibly cold at night. So you need to be prepared for every kind of weather. And children are amongst the most vulnerable because their bodies take longer to adapt to changes in temperature. And you will have heard some of the stories of babies dying in their parents' arms because they weren't able to generate enough warmth. And the onesies, the little suits you see that are insulated, are absolutely essential for so many. And so I hope we can continue that. The last thing is what I call the crisis yet to come. We're going to get to the end of this year, but we're seeing an uptick in the number of hurricanes. We are expecting something to happen this year, tragically, that will probably become a major disaster. We, of course, hope that's not what's going to happen, but the team are preparing and gearing up for the ability to deploy a Shelterbox response team to set aside enough shelter kits to respond to the kind of acute emergency that has been our calling card for the last 20 years. And so I want them to be able to react on a dime. There's no excuse. We don't get a timeout because of coronavirus. We've got to respond at speed. One of our calling cards is we are agile enough to get out there faster than bigger actors. And these kits have been proven to reach some places which I wouldn't think you could get something like this. And so we're getting ready for the worst possible scenario, and we've been doing some scenario planning here in headquarters about how we would do it and some of the logistical arrangements we'd need to have in place to do that. So if you want to hear more, I know Kerry and team and I are at your disposal to brief you further.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Sanj. And I want to honor everyone's time, and I know we have some time booked for Q&A. So I would love to, as I get to the last question I have for you, Sanj, I would love to get you to chat in your questions at this time. Some of you have already been doing that, so thank you. We're going to take some questions. And as we get these questions in, Sanj, question. So we've looked at the global displacement. The numbers are massive. So we're looking at over 100 million. We know that that's anticipated to grow to over 200 million. So given the magnitude of the scale of the problem, can you talk a bit about, as an organization, some of the things we're thinking about, where we're headed beyond 2020, and some of the big problems that we face require our organization to scale to meet some of these needs, increased needs. So what are you thinking about?
So first of all, what I love about what we do is the tangibility of the aid we provide. And I like to be able to measure impact always. And in a complex world where we're looking for theories of change, and for longer term improvement to people's lives. What we've said is that the first step to that longer road to recovery and the human development that we all want to see for everyone around the world starts with shelter. And it isn't an oversimplification that when you've been displaced and you've literally run out of your home with whatever you're carrying, one of your first concerns is, where am I going to sleep tonight? And our aid, whether it's in response to the changing climate, to pandemics, to natural disasters or conflicts, is still about providing shelter, because from shelter comes so many other things. It provides a place for your children to learn through solar lights that we provide. It provides safety for women and girls, because we don't just distribute, we make sure we safely distribute, and that women and girls, once they're living in one of our shelters, can also access services from there safely. It means we're providing cooking utensils in the right context, where large food distribution organizations are distributing the kind of items which marry up with the kits so that they can use them effectively. It means that if you're a father or a mother, you can go out and work and still come home and your children have a home. It's much harder to hold down a job if you haven't got a roof over your head. So many things follow on from that first thing, which is shelter. And there is no shortage of need. As we've said, less than 10% of global needs are being met. So I don't expect it to get less. I expect it to get more, tragically. So we need to stay focused on that. But we also need to adapt our model and look at how can we provide more resilience to communities in the face of changing climate and more unpredictable weather patterns. So what you're going to see over the next few years with Shelterbox is further adaptations to our kit and improvements. Already you're seeing in Philippines, when we did our last distribution, materials that are helping people make their homes stronger to withstand what is predictably going to be the next cyclone next year, as has been the case for many years in the Philippines because of its location. We're also going to be talking about how we articulate that to governments to help them build back more effectively so that they don't need us the next time, because it is a tragedy that we exist. We exist because the world needs us, but it is an ideal world where Shelterbox doesn't need to be there. And so we are striving towards communities that are more sustainable and more secure. And we do that by, first of all, helping them on that first step to recovery. So I think if you're interested and you want to know more, please get in touch with us. You have the details from Kerry, and we can talk more about it. The last thing I would say is on scale, Kerry, the way we reach scale is we get in there fast with money that has been donated by generous individuals. We can go to scale with much larger donations, but also partnerships with government to get to more people. So if I can do 2,000 households in Vanuatu, I can do 6,000. So we are looking to meet more whole of need. So if 10,000 families are impacted by a disaster, we don't want to just get the 2,000 most vulnerable, which is what we do. We want to get to at least double that.
Excellent. Great. Ambitious. Big problems need a big vision. Question. Many questions coming in, so thank you. The first one is, does Shelterbox have a special box that has items that can facilitate isolation and treatment?
Great question. So our kit is already adapted to help with isolation with the items that we've described, hygiene materials, also short education during distributions on how to isolate safely, as well as PPE, and of course the tent itself and the water purification. In terms of treatment, that's more complex. And so we do, wherever we work, partner up with medical providers to ensure that if people think they have symptoms and they ask us at a distribution, we know where to send them to get treatment. But that is a very medical specific need. The best thing they can do is use our kit to stop them getting the symptoms in the first place as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. So with the global pandemic, is there a plan to send out the SRTs? And is there a plan to begin recruiting new SRTs? And for all the webinar participants, the SRT is the Shelterbox response team. Those are highly trained civilian responders who travel to the front lines of crisis situations, disaster situations, and facilitate the aid.
Yeah, and they go through a rigorous assessment process, psychometric, psychological, physical testing in a hardship condition, just to see how you cope under physical pressure with stress. And yes, they are still the spearhead of our response. They are able to distribute, assess, monitor. They literally do everything. And they have not been deploying of late, not for lack of desire, but because of constraints due to travel with coronavirus, but also going back to that principle of do no harm. We don't want to be seen to be bringing coronavirus to communities that are relatively free from it. But I do expect to see SRTs deploying again in 2021. That's our goal. And the advantage they bring is the great partnerships they form with local organizations that make us more effective together to deliver aid more effectively and quickly. And so some of our biggest signature responses, from Nepal earthquake to Haiti to the big tsunami in 2004, have all been led by SRTs. So I expect that to happen again.
Awesome. Next question. I like this one. I can assist with this one. Is the green box reused for anything? Okay, so we get asked this a lot. We get asked, do we take back the aid items? Do we recycle the aid items? And these items are a gift to the family, and they often incorporate them in their lives in so many different ways. Relative to the green box, what I've seen a lot of is to really hold personal effects. We've seen it used as a cradle for a baby. We've seen it used as a water carrier to store purified water, to store food, to store personal effects. And the other aid items also, I mean, we've heard about the tools that we've provided in Paraguay last year with the flooding being used to help a farmer start a business again and get back to work. And we've also heard about the tents as storefronts. I love this, and I've actually seen this in one of the barangays in the Philippines, where along the sides of the streets, you see the tents, and you have all the little sachets with things for sale on the patio of that tent. That has become someone's storefront, which is, what is better than that, right? As you've transitioned to a more permanent shelter, you're using these aid items to help you start a business. Fantastic. How many countries is Shelterbox currently working in? We are active in 9 countries today. So that includes Syria, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Vanuatu, India, as well as the Philippines. And we actually have a Operations Philippines, a warehouse in Cebu. We respond there quite often because of the typhoons there. And as Sanj mentioned, we are readying every single day for disaster X that we don't yet know about, but we know is going to happen and is going to devastate communities. So we're preparing every day. These are some of the current deployments of where we are today. Let me see if there's any final questions.
Just to also add, because we're an emergency organization, we don't stay in the same countries for long. So unlike other organizations, we very rarely have an office. It's about distributing in response to an acute crisis, sometimes staying longer if it's chronic, but then thinking about the next emergency. And that's really important, that we stay focused on meeting that immediate acute need.
Mm-hmm. Sanj, thank you for being here today. What keeps you up at night, and what are some of the biggest needs of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, aside from my children, I think the thing, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the scale of what we're confronting. And I remember taking on this job, and then 3 months later, coronavirus hitting, and going, people are looking to me and to the organization to respond, and then taking a deep breath and thinking about what's the first problem we need to solve, what's the next one, and the next one, and the next one. And you take it bit by bit, and you try to achieve measurable impact. So don't try and solve the whole world's problem everywhere. Focus on where you can make a difference. Focus on where shelter is going to make a difference, and then work out a plan to do it. And I've really been inspired by the colleagues I work with, who sat down in March, and whilst others were thinking about coronavirus and their own families, they sat down and wrote with me and the rest of the team a plan for coronavirus response. How is our kit going to change? How are our logistics going to change? How are we going to keep people safe as we distribute aid? And how are we going to measure the impact, even though we can't always go to these places to do it? So I think that kept me up, and then it just inspired me to look at what we can do differently. And I think for the future, like I've said, there's a bigger crisis waiting for us in the changing climate and the unpredictable weather patterns. But I'm confident we're already making roads with some technology partners into earlier prediction of weather models, so that we can get ahead of the curve and be ready wherever that might be and wherever our aid is needed.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. There are many questions. I think there's probably about 15 more that we're likely not going to have a chance to answer. And I know I want to honor everyone's time today. So I have a commitment to getting back to each and every one of you if your question was not answered.
So do I.
I know that all of you have lots of places that you can be right now, albeit virtually, but I really appreciate that you took the time to care about the work that we're doing day in and day out, the problems we're confronting, and so many of you have leaned in to help being part of the solution. So it's an absolute privilege to be here with you today. Sanj, I'm so grateful for your time, for the heart and soul that you put into this work day in and day out. And I tell you all the time, it's such a privilege to work with you personally. I have my email address at the bottom. I have my phone number. I would be so thrilled to hear from any of you who participated today. I know that it takes a village to make this work possible. Many of you lean in with your time, with your talent, with your resources, and we're very grateful for all that you do to make the global work of Shelterbox possible. And as we started this whole discussion, there's lots of conflicts in our world. There are lots of disasters, never ending, and now there's pandemics. And I will tell you that the number one thing that we do day in and day out, which is the focus of provision of emergency shelter, really transforms people's lives. And it really is the catalyst to helping people persevere and move on with their lives. And it's seemingly very small, right? It's a very special point in the process, very early on, but it's a critical step. So Sanj, thanks for all you're doing. Any final words or thoughts for everyone?
No, only that I know when I first got into the sector and looking at the scale of the need and the scale of the problem, it's easy to get lost in it and wonder what you can do as an individual. And I would ask you to hold to what has kept me going for the last 10 years in the sector, which is just pick a problem that you know you can help solve and get involved. And Kerry shared her details. I'm very happy to get back to you as well. And you'll find if you take a problem one step at a time, it is definitely making a positive impact. And ultimately, you know, if you believe in Robert Kennedy's Ripple of Hope speech, it is about small changes that lead to big changes. And I'm really proud to be part of this organization and the change it's leading.
On that note, Sanj, I always say everyone has something to contribute and something to give. So we are so thrilled that all of you are here today. We'd love for you to continue to participate and be involved in the work of Shelterbox, and we'll continue to keep you up to date and in touch on our deployments. Thank you so much for being here today, and have a great rest of your day, and stay healthy and stay safe, all of you.